Let's just jump right into this explainer and unpack what's being called India's Gen Z uprising. We're talking about the Cockroach Junta Party and that massive parliament march. To understand exactly how these youth-led protests brought central New Delhi to a complete standstill, we're going to look at three main things: the origins of this mobilization, the dramatic escalation right there on the ground, and finally, the profoundly contested narratives surrounding the whole movement. Take a look at this quote. "I want my government to be accountable to the students who have lost their lives because of the NEET exam. I want my government to be accountable and answer our questions." That raw frustration, it perfectly captures the desperate urgency of the thousands of young students who took to the streets. I mean, we really need to pause and think about this for a second. These aren't seasoned political operators, right? Many of them are literally first-time protesters. We're talking about students, young professionals, and everyday citizens who traveled from all over the country, some actually fighting with their own families just to be there. They are driven by this one powerful desire. They just want their voices heard, and they want answers from the people in charge. So picture this. It's July 20th, and a massive wave of these largely Gen Z protesters attempted an unprecedented march right toward the Indian parliament. And honestly, the sheer scale of it caught pretty much everyone by surprise. The crowd at Jantar Mantar, which is Delhi's designated protest site, just swelled to thousands. This wasn't your typical brief sit-in. It was a high-octane environment. Think midnight vigil, pouring rain, young people standing shoulder to shoulder, demanding sweeping reforms to an education system that they feel has completely failed them. Section 1. The exam leak crisis. So what exactly pushed this generation out of their classrooms and onto the streets of the capital in the first place? Well, the sheer scale of the issue is honestly staggering. This isn't just about one bad test. We are looking at a systemic crisis of trust, all fueled by repeated examination paper leaks. Actually, reports indicate there have been 93 separate paper leaks across the country. 93. And the absolute tipping point, that was the recent NEET exam scandal. For those who might not know, NEET is a fiercely competitive medical entrance exam. So for millions of students who literally spend years of their lives preparing, these leaks aren't just administrative hiccups. They are devastating blows that can completely derail their entire futures. Tragically, the stakes here are quite literally life and death. Protesters are actually demanding 1 crore rupees in compensation for the families of NEET candidates who died by suicide. The immense crushing pressure of these exams, compounded by the heartbreaking realization that the system itself is compromised, it's led to absolute tragedies. The students out there on the streets are carrying the heavy weight of those losses. So this financial demand, it's really as much about seeking accountability as it is about demanding justice for their peers. Moving on to Section 2, Rise of the Gen Z CJP. Let's look at how all of this immense frustration birthed a completely new kind of political mobilization. You really have to notice how incredibly fast this whole thing escalated. It started back in May with an Instagram page that had a, well, highly unconventional name, the Cockroach Junta Party, or CJP for short. But the actual physical catalyst hit in early July, when prominent activist Sonam Wangchuk began a hunger strike. After he fasted for over 20 days, police forcibly moved him to a hospital on July 18th. And according to reports on the ground, that move, it hit a massive raw nerve. It instantly transformed all that online traction into a huge physical mobilization, which then culminated in that enormous July 20th march. Right as this momentum peaked, the CJP laid out 3 distinct, absolutely uncompromising demands to the government. First, they wanted their leading voice, Sonam Wangchuk, released immediately from the hospital. Second, they demanded the resignation of the Union Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, holding him directly responsible for the exam leaks. And third, like we just talked about, they demanded that 1 crore rupees in compensation for the victims' families. These 3 clearly defined goals became the ultimate rallying cry for the thousands of people marching. All right, Section 3, the March to Parliament. Let's see what happened when this highly motivated group finally collided with state authority. So despite clear police warnings that prohibitory orders, specifically Section 144, were in place across New Delhi, the crowds still attempted to move from Sansat Marg right toward the Parliament complex. Now, in response, Delhi police didn't just toss up a few standard barriers. No, they erected these massive 14-foot barricades to literally physically seal the exits of Jantar Manter. They also heavily deployed the Rapid Action Force alongside other paramilitary units. This created an incredibly tense standoff with crowds that, honestly, the police themselves later admitted they really struggled to contain. Now, it's worth noting the government did try to initiate some outreach by having Health Minister J.P. Nadda meet with the CJP leadership. But The meeting didn't exactly diffuse the tension. The CJP submitted their written demands, but when they walked away without any immediate roadmap or real concessions for educational reform, well, the crowd's frustration just multiplied. Without a clear, immediate resolution on the table, that massive gathering was pushed even further toward those physical barricades, really setting the stage for what came next. Which brings us to Section 4, clashing narratives of violence. What actually happened next at those security cordons is highly contested, and it is absolutely vital we look at both sides impartially here. The accounts from the ground are just starkly different. On one side, the CJP organizers and participating students claimed they were conducting a totally peaceful march when they were met with unprovoked tear gas and baton charges. They specifically pointed out that young students and girls were injured in the fray. But on the flip side, the Delhi police present a completely different narrative. They state that this was an unauthorized, highly aggressive gathering where crowds were actively breaking barricades, pelting security personnel with stones, and vandalizing police and government vehicles. To really highlight the severity of these clashes from the state's perspective, Delhi police reported that 118 personnel, and we're talking including senior officers here, sustained serious injuries during the skirmishes. It's crazy to think that this massive security deployment, which involved roughly 2,000 to 3,000 personnel across a bunch of different locations, was, according to reports, just completely caught off guard by the sheer unanticipated volume of protesters that showed up that day. Conversely, around 70 protesters were detained following the clashes. The police went ahead and filed FIRs, that's First Information Reports, for rioting, assaulting public servants, and damaging public property. They're actually actively pulling CCTV footage and electronic evidence right now to identify anyone involved in the vandalism. And in the middle of all this, CJP founder Abhijit Dipke came out and publicly apologized to the students who were hurt during the baton charges, which really shows the heavy emotional toll that day took on the young people participating. And finally, Section 5, the standoff and next steps. The physical clashes might have subsided for the moment, but the political and social shockwaves? We are just beginning to feel those across the country. Over on the political front, the Prime Minister has publicly addressed the catalyst of this whole crisis. Speaking to the NDA parliamentary party, Prime Minister Narendra Modi called for a massive collective national effort to build a foolproof examination system. He made it clear that preventing these kinds of breaches is a crucial national responsibility, and he promised the strictest possible punishment for the culprits behind the paper leaks, making sure to note that the government had already made swift arrests. Meanwhile, the opposition has absolutely seized on the momentum coming from the streets. Inside Parliament, they forced some heavy disruptions, which led to repeated adjournments of both houses due to just continuous uproar. Lawmakers even moved a 267 notice in the Rajya Sabha, that's the upper house of India's parliament, basically demanding that all regular business be totally suspended so they could hold a detailed, immediate discussion on the exam leaks, the resulting educational crisis, and of course the heavy-handed response to the protesting youth. But back on the ground, things are still pretty tense. CJP founder Abhijit Dipke and his core supporters have actually reclaimed their protest stage over at Jantar Manter. The police confirmed they haven't removed the tents and that, yes, peaceful protest is still allowed. However, reporters on the scene have noted a really significant drop in footfall. Those harrowing visuals of tear gas and batons have understandably left a lingering fear among the younger, first-time protesters, creating this kind of lull as the movement contemplates its next strategic move. So, as the dust settles at Jantar Mantar, we have to ask ourselves this final, defining question. We are watching a generation that has just grown tired of systemic failures, deciding to take their future into their own hands. They are up against massive state infrastructure and deeply entrenched political realities. So, will this incredible burst of Gen Z energy be the catalyst that finally forces foolproof educational reform in India? Or will those 14-foot barricades, both literal and metaphorical, remain standing? Well, that is exactly what we'll be watching for next.